Ooh, that sounds better than last month. Thank you for fixing that. That's great. Welcome, everybody. I have met some of you in person before. If we haven't met, my name is Julia. As Molly mentioned, I'm the Curator of Photography at the Portland Art Museum. I'm thrilled to be here today to visit with and speak with our Blue Sky Ahead artists, which is really exciting. Before we do that, although we are looking into the future, for the most part today, I think it is really important that we do acknowledge some of the past as well. And Blue Sky does have a land acknowledgement, which I'd like to read. We at Blue Sky humbly acknowledge that our programming is being held on the traditional lands of the Multnomah, Clackamas, bands of Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Molalla, and many other tribes who made their homes along the Columbia and Willamette rivers, as they are called today. So let's keep that in mind as we gather together today in this space. I have lived here going on 10 years and have worked with Blue Sky Gallery off and on, so I've been here for a nice chunk of the history of this really, really important institution. We're very fortunate to have Blue Sky here in the city. The founders exhibited here last month. Hopefully all of you or most of you had a chance to see that exhibition. And this month we have Blue Sky Ahead Futures. I thought what we could do for this panel is structure the discussion in two parcels, if you will, 2 moments. And during the first, I'd like to speak with each artist, and hopefully I also welcome the artists to speak with one another as things come up as we're talking. We will not have time to get to everything, unfortunately. There's 6 of you, which is really exciting. And we wish that we could give all of you more time. And I imagine a number of you will have questions that we can hopefully host at the end, or they can be asked one-on-one later as well. The second part of the panel, I think it's also really important that we do, in fact, think about what the future means. This is an institution that has been here doing many important things and a lot of great work for the past 45 years, going on 45 years. What happens next? Where do we go next? How is the world changing? How is photography changing? So what does that mean for an institution like this? I would love for us to have maybe more of an open discussion and maybe put together some ideas if at all possible. I would love to hear your ideas as well, because I work at an institution that is 127 years old and has a lot of changing to do and a lot of work to do. So I think it's really important that we all think about these things, in particular in terms of photography as the field changes. And I think it's an important reminder, photography has been changing from day one. This is nothing new. The only thing that's super consistent about photography is change. So it's really important that we embrace that and move forward in that spirit as well. So those are the 2 portions of the presentation I'd like for us to work through. There were some terms for the selection of the artists that you see on the walls here this month. And Zemi, thank you so much for helping me with all of the background information. I did not do the selection for these works. So it is my understanding, and if anybody needs to correct me, please feel free, all the photographers in this exhibition, the call was made for photographers who were under the age of 45, and I believe also residing in Oregon, working in Oregon, yes? And 48 artists submitted 81 proposals, and so the 6 that you see here are those who were selected. And the founders of Blue Sky Gallery, as well as the exhibition committee, worked on selecting the photographers, and I'm very grateful. Some of the selectors gave me some feedback as to what was important to them in the work that they saw and why they made the selections that they did, so thank you to those of you who were able to give me that information. In prepping for this panel, I also asked each participant, each artist, 2 questions. They were asked the same question. The first one was, why did you choose this grouping of your work to submit to Blue Sky for the Blue Sky Ahead show? And then, is there any topic or issue you would like me to cover in terms of your work, Blue Sky Gallery photography, or the arts in general during the panel discussion? So that's a lot. We're not going to get to it all, but it's helpful for me to see where folks are, how their work ended up here, and then maybe some of their thoughts about where photography is going. And so hopefully hopefully we can share all of that with you. What I wanted to do also, just to give a little bit of structure, and there could have been multiple ways of going about this, but this is the one that I landed on. I thought that perhaps because everyone's work is quite different, there are definitely some overlaps, but we have a lot of variety as well. Subject matter, driving ideas, so on and so forth. I thought maybe we could work from the world all the way out sort of, and then move in. So go from the global to the local, if you will, go from the world further out and then come back into the very personal. And some folks, bounce back and forth between those polar regions, if you will. But I just thought that might be a way to structure it. So there's no real hierarchy other than the fact that it's just by that type of term, if you will. So that means that we're going to start with Troi, to my left. And Troi's work is on the Vodou ceremonies, and you will probably have some better verbiage for me and for us to explain something that I don't know much about at all. It's a different culture, it's a different part of the world, and I do know that you started photographing in Haiti in 2010, which is a pivotal and critically difficult year for Haiti, between the earthquake that killed a couple 100,000 people and also displaced over 1 million people, and then the cholera outbreak, the subsequent health issues after that. So I'd love for you to tell us why in 2010 did you go to Haiti, and how did this subject matter become important to you?
Well, if the earthquake was in 2010, it must have been before that, because I was there before and then after the earthquake, and that was incredible. But the photographs you see over there, it is voodoo, but it's not. I've spent time working in Haiti doing NGO work, photographing like that. It was not something I liked at all, and it wasn't appreciated by the Haitians either. But I found Haiti absolutely extraordinary, and my interest in voodoo is more that it's a way through ritual forms, through ceremonies, that they translate the life that they're living. And it's almost like a kind of much more pure way of seeing it, rather than the typical kind of connotations and the views we have of Haiti, which again, if you speak with a lot of Haitians, they really despise that view that the world has. But the other factor is that I'm very interested in, ideas and notions and things about strength. I like to know, how things endure, how things survive. My best friend is quadriplegic. He's been there 18 years like that. It's the toughest life of anyone I've ever met, period. But I'm interested in how somebody like that continues. And Haiti, 12 million people, whatever the numbers are right now, is extraordinary that they can keep moving forward, keep surviving. So the interest in voodoo, and I've been there off and on for 10 years, been to a lot of pilgrimages and stuff, is that I think it reflects the life in Haiti in the way that I see it, without bringing in the negative connotations. But you see a display of incredible enduring strength in these ceremonies, and beauty, and artistry, everything. Haiti is absolutely extraordinary. It's an absolutely extraordinary place, and Julia knows incredible history of film and photography in that land. There's a reason so many people from the outside come in, because it's absolutely one of the most extraordinary places I've seen on the planet. So if that gets something of what you were asking.
Yes, it does. And to that end, I actually don't know. I know the history of photography in terms of the camera being used as a tool of colonization and of power. I don't know the specific histories of photographing in Haiti, but I am very curious, and I think it's an important conversation for all of us to have, for those of us who use cameras and take photographs in places that we visit. The photographic work that you do, and on your website, you consider yourself a documentary photographer, is that, or do you use any other
I really don't know. I mean, I do stuff that relates to that, but yeah.
and you go to Haiti, and you also mentioned to me that you plan on working on the subject of voodoo for a long time. This is very important to you in the work that you do, and something that you want to explore further. How do you, as an outsider, go to a place that resonates with you in a very important way? And you are, in this case, choosing a place like many of us actually do, who have a white European background. We go to places that were either colonized in the past or folks have really been oppressed. So how do you function within that space, and then how do you bear the responsibility of bringing images out of that place and then showing them in a space like this, or elsewhere in the United States, that can underpin any work towards fighting against any type of stereotyping, any type of further oppression? How do you work with the camera and photography in that way?
Well, and you're talking about Haiti. This is a country that has traditional songs about killing white people. So yeah, there's a history to this place, and it's difficult when you go in there. But if most recently I was doing a project with the Kurds, do stuff in Venezuela, Ethiopia. In each place, there's a history, sometimes relating to what you're talking about. Not Ethiopia in this case, but there's always a history behind it. The single most important thing you can do when you go into these places is have a relationship. That relationship can be convoluted or mixed into all kinds of things. And most of the times you don't understand a lot of these things. I go to countries, China or something, and I was totally naive to the Cultural Revolution, what happened to them. There's all kinds of ignorance. Actually, there's sort of relating to what you're saying, Dorothea Lane, one of the things she said was the best way to go into any situation is to go in ignorant. So there's a lot of ignorance that comes in with these things, but then you try to bring in the relationship. And that may be the one person, it may be with ceremony, the pilgrimages and things, but you have to build relationship. So I don't know how to answer your question really. You get into the politics of things, it becomes impossible when you're speaking with people and stuff. You have to have a direct relationship with the people you're photographing. It can be a relationship that lasts seconds, or it can be a relationship that goes over many, many years, but you have to create a relationship. If you do that, then hopefully the images will be strong. If the images are strong, then there isn't any stereotyping. If there's something that's genuinely there that people respond to, then it will hopefully go past all of that. So, I hope that answers that.
Are there particular modes that you use to help with the explanation of the work that you're doing when you display these photographs? How do you find people receiving them here, say, in the United States? What kind of work are you finding that they do?
The Haiti stuff gets a lot more critical reception. People like it critically. It's not something that I generally have. The Museum of Photographic Arts purchased a portfolio of some of this work, but that's really it. It's something that gets more critical attention. People don't like looking at a lot of the images, I think. I have a lot of things I'm not going to say for my thinking as to why that is, but it's too much for a lot of people. It's very aggressive. It's very intense. But people are interested in it, and I hope they're interested in it. I hope they see things, and I love speaking about it. So it's a mixture of things. I've only been, and that work was from just 3 years ago, and I've only been photographing around a decade or so. So the difficulty is just plain getting your work shown. You have to stay working. You got to keep. How do you do these things? It's next to impossible. You try to send something to maybe apply for a grant and try a competition. It's unbelievable. The time is. I'm sure everybody like it. It's crazy. And then some of us even put stuff on Instagram. It drives you nuts. Anyway, so it's a mixture.
We can talk about social media in the second half. I think it's a really critical tool, and how do we use it to our best advantage, and what does it mean for photography now and a bit later. Thank you, Troi. Emma. We are, oh yes, thank you. work, which can be seen in the back room. So I see that you're fascinated by the intersection of nature and culture, which is certainly, it's one of the ways I term it. And I know there is quite a wonderful history of blue sky, thinking about that issue, this clashing, this point of contact, if you will. How we bump up against species and natural orders that were established long before we came on the scene, and those natural orders are directly affected by what we do. How did you come to embrace this as what you really wanted to explore? And I believe in your email you also mentioned that it's important to you to continue to do this work, sort of like what Troi said about his subject matter.
Yeah, this subject is really important to me, and I think it came about as a photographic project because I just was taking all these photos anyway. So I was photographing for this project before I knew that I was doing that. And I was living in the Midwest, so I was able to travel a lot, and my spouse and I would kind of just drive 3-hour day trips and see what zoos or aquariums or museums we could find. And I started to notice very early on how many funny and sad scenes there were in those places. And one of my favorite things to do is try and eavesdrop on family conversations in museums. And, is that dead? Is that alive? Is that real? And listen to the parents try and explain, well, kind of. It's a real something. It's not a real antelope anymore. So it's something I've always been really interested in, and as many of us know, turning a passion into an art project is such a lovely thing to do.
Caring about something so much and working with a particular subject as closely as our artists do can also be very painful, depending on the subject matter. And I'm curious about this relationship. When I look at work like this, I think about somebody like Robert Adams, who is consistently showing us very difficult things about the world we live in particular the American West. What is so interesting, though, he always talks about the hope that is built into that. So he will talk about looking away from the clear cuts and taking a look at the Pacific Ocean because he needs to clear his vision and his mind. And so even though in this very serious tragedy that we are constantly dealing with and that is coming at us more rapidly, he still finds hope. Do you wrestle with those two things as well? Do you find hope in the intersections that you see in the photographic work that you do and what you document?
Of course, yeah. And I most of the time am very hopeful. I recognize that it is a privilege to be close to animals and learn from them. And so I'm grateful that people of all types get to experience animals in all ways. But I can't say I've always been hopeful because, gosh, just the climate change conversation is growing, and that's very exciting that people are talking about it and making art about it, but it is very difficult, I think, to be a person of my generation and have hope at all. So yeah, I think visiting those places and making these photographs, and so I'm having a good time making the photographs, getting excited about the work. But it's also really hard to be a patron of these places. I don't know if I always agree with their ethics and the treatment of the animals at them. But it's just, I try and kind of revel in the fun I have being around animals. And I'm not someone that's like, I want to go like wrestle big cats. Like, I just love like insects even, just watching them. It's such a privilege to see animals and be close to them, alive or dead, honestly. I really value the animal lives that were given up for taxidermy and museums so that humans can learn. So yes and no. I feel hopeful, and I'm sorry, but I also feel really hopeless.
Thank you. Nolan. Hi. Thank you so much. One of the ways you answered my question to you via email was that you were very interested in politics, in stereotypes, in childhood today, what it's like to be a child today versus perhaps what we all knew when we were children and what we experienced. And sometimes, the politics take a back seat, but they do push forward in certain ways in your photographs. Having taken a look at them online and then quickly here, there's a lovely quietness to them, so they might not scream political right when we look at them right away. And I see you in some ways in terms of the work in here as a bit of a bridge, because the work is both very personal, because it's your family. This is your daughter, yes. But it's also your daughter is your subject, your daughter is not you, your daughter is you, your daughter is not you. And that must be a very complex relationship photographically, even though we have many instances of that in the history of photography. What is that like as an experience for you?
Well, yeah, it is in a way, but it grows as well, because it just started out, I was just taking photos of her, and I was trying to, and I didn't know it would come to this level. I just started kind of getting back into expressing myself as an artist. I was a graphic designer, and I lost my job, was laid off, and this was an outlet for me, because when we had my daughter, before we had my daughter, I was painting a lot, and when we had her, my studio became her bedroom, and I lost my creative outlet. I had no creative outlet, and then my wife got me just a small camera, a digital camera, my first digital camera, and I was just starting taking snapshots. I had no idea it would come to what it is now, but as that creative outlet grew, I could kind of place some of my feelings into these photographs, and she was just doing her thing, and for the most part, probably most of those pictures, it's just her being her, and I was documenting that, and then I could kind of slip in some ambiguity and some metaphor for me as an artist, and it was starting to feel good again. And then, like you said, it's quiet. Some of those tones are quiet. So as she grows and adapts, and so do I as an artist, and it becomes more of a collaboration. I have another body of work that is kind of built upon this one, where I keep all the context out. There's no, there's no environment, there's no facial expression, there's no human expression. It's just hands and object, and I tried to get what I was putting into this photographs in a more bold way. I wanted to be out there and bold with it, and so that was, it's growing in that way, and now she's getting involved in it as well. We just did some photos. It's not a part of any series, but she was moved by, you mentioned the Native Americans in this area. My wife and her are Cowlitz, and they're tribal members, and we were watching, my daughter and I were watching a video on one of our tribal members who, she's a high school girl for the Muckleshoot High School, and she went to the state championship track and field, and she ran with a red handprint on her face. And Haley thought that was the coolest thing. And she's like, you go girl and everything. So then she wanted photos with that red handprint. And Chris, we were explaining what that meant, and it's cool seeing her get moved by this now too, and influencing my work as well. So it's really a collaboration.
I was about to say, it sounds like it's becoming more collaborative. That's fantastic. So your relationship grows as she grows and as you grow as a photographer. So.
Right. We're growing together as people and as artists, I think. Yeah, definitely.
I have another thought. You mentioned, and Troi mentioned this as well, when you are working and when you look at these photographs and consider your daughter's milieu and upbringing, you have concerns about the mediated world and how different screens have made things. Would you like to talk a little bit more about that? And I do find it interesting too, because photography is almost always about technology. So we have this push and this pull that many of us experience in many ways, but you're experiencing it through the language of photography with your daughter. So,
Right. And it's a weird, it's a weird balance because you need the technology. The technology's there. I can't keep her away from the technology at all. But I don't try to have it dominate her life in the way that it is in some other, households and families in our society right now. So, I mean, we don't have a video game system, she doesn't have tablets or iPhones or anything like that. And, on long car trips, I'll probably give her mine, or she piggybacks off friends, and they use it at school. They use computers and tablets at school as well. But just seeing, it's a tough balance. I don't want it to dominate and influence her the way that I see it in society right now. I think who knows what issues and problems this is going to bring in 20 years. The kids are grown, and so I think it's the best to grow up the way we all probably grew up.
How much editing do you have to do? Does technology or contemporary stuff work its way into some of these photographs, and do you choose to not move those further along in the editing process, or is she living a life that, for the most part, these objects, these considerations don't make their way into the photographs at all?
No, there's not. I can't even really think of any photographs that might have her holding some electronic device. We just don't. We don't have them in our house. We have a TV, which is kind of an, early morning and evening thing, and that's it. There's no real. I can't edit it if I don't have it. So.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's why I'm just curious, because editing is such a critical process to any series of photographs that are put on the wall. So it's very interesting that you're not even removing that information. It's just not actually there. Thank you. Thank you so much. Jamila, I'm really excited to talk about your work too, because it made me think about various moments in the history of photography. And I was looking at your work in this particular format that we put together, almost as a bridge between the outside world, which we've just talked about, and the inside world, the internal world, whether it's imagination or our own bodies. So it made me think a little bit about John Sarkowski and this idea of former curator at MoMA in the 20th century, who really instituted or put to language the idea of the internal and the external, the mirror and the window. And I feel like there are many ways that your work brings this together. There's this wonderful storytelling aspect to the work as well, which has a very important tradition in the history of photography too. Objects that evoke time passing, nostalgia. How did you come to work in this mode?
So my background is in theater. That was kind of where I started first. So the stage and performance, and the idea that you have a story that you're watching, and then you also have the internal that's kind of shown either through the objects around the person or how they express themselves and how it visually looks, was a huge part of that. And then that also tied to cinema, which is the other thing that was my two main obsessions and how they kind of come together. And so a lot of my work kind of plays off of that, either visually, kind of tapping into the nostalgic aspects and colors and themes that are really prevalent in movies and cinema, the more stylized version, so that the colors that are chosen, so that you kind of focus on those objects. I like to bring a lot of objects or props into things, so that if you spend a little more time looking, you'll start noticing little things and how they might have something to do with that character or the world that's happening around them, because I just love the idea of really rich environments. Because sometimes, the normal world has rich environments, but usually don't have things that you can pinpoint and see. And so that's one thing I get to do as a photographer, is kind of craft the character and their world, and you kind of get to see a glimpse of it. And so that is one of the things I always try to do, is show something that's happening, but also kind of show the internal that's not there. So it's a little highlight of the photograph.
When I think about these images and the history of women photographers, number one, and then oftentimes the genre of more fantastical photography or storytelling, when a woman is making the images, oftentimes the subjects are white women, other white women, right? So I think about Julia Margaret Cameron, I think about Lady Clementina Hayward and Cindy Sherman, you know, and of course my mind goes a little bit maybe to Carrie Mae Weems, but oftentimes I get the impression that the paragon of womanhood is white, right? And I know not all of your models are maybe female identifying. I believe there are some who may be male from looking at your website, but I find it important that there are folks of color in these images. So is that something that you have also noticed in this type of a genre of photography in terms of its history, the representation that is involved?
Yeah, I mean, as I was studying photography, I feel like a lot of people I looked up to predominantly, at least in surreal or fantastical looking work, tended to be white, which was, it's the artists, in some cases they were self-portraitures, so like that's just, they worked with what they had. And when I first started shooting a lot of it, I was using myself, and that was, I wasn't sure how I felt about it, and in some cases I would almost try to avoid showing too much of myself because of the worry that someone might not relate because it doesn't look like them, at least what the general world sees. But then I also knew so many people who didn't find themselves in fantasy stories and movies and cinema, and it's like, why can't that person be in those same stories? And so I became a little bit more comfortable with that. And then also the people I would seek out, I would try to find people who looked like me, or at least were not the people you saw as often, because that's just like something to differentiate, just because they have just as much of a history in the world and they've existed as long as everybody else. So it's nice to kind of see that exist in a fantastical world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I imagine there must be an appreciation from those who choose to collaborate with you that this is something that is possible and you're making possible, and then you're moving out into the world as well.
Yeah, I definitely met some people who are really excited to get to see themselves in a surreal and fantastical space when they normally wouldn't. So I definitely appreciated that, yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Sam, image and text. One of my favorites. I do. I love image and text. Where shall we go? Image, text. So are you the model in some, all, a few, none?
You know, I started as a model in some of them, but through editing, I took it out because I kept having the cable release in the images, and I felt that disrupted what I was trying to say. So I asked to redo some of them with some friends for the most part. I'm in a few of them where you can't see the whole body, but for a lot of them it's not me.
When you are working in this vein, when you're thinking about image and text together, are you thinking about it, folks like this? I can never escape Roland Barthes, but I'm okay with that. Like this, I really am fine with that. I met somebody a few months ago who actually took a class from him, and it was like this connection to somebody I've only known in my mind and through his writing. But the way that we, in a particular culture or cultures, cannot get away from language, whether we understand it through a written language, through words, through series of words, but also through the physical form, and then also how that physical form is presented. So could you talk about some of the ties that you have between the image and the text, and then could you talk a little bit more about the symbolism that you are moving forward in the images themselves?
Could you repeat the second part of the question? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm really interested in I'm always interested in the ways that if there is text near an image, how the words anchor that text. You know, we have these two languages working together. So maybe can we also think about the images themselves and what are the messages in the images? I'm going into a spiral now. Could talk for like a whole semester on this. Okay, let's just start with the first one. Talk about your feelings about relationship and text, the two together, and why that was meaningful to you in this work. How about that?
Sure. So I was making this work because I was kind of questioning like how I physically carried myself in the world as like a woman presenting person. I was reading a lot of like queer theory like Judith Butler, and I was kind of interested in the idea of gender as like a repeated like ritualized performance rather than a stable thing or presence. And I was interested in like seeing where like sources of how these constructions came about. So I was looking through text just at my university's library, like not really. I found like an etiquette section, and I just like was flipping through books, and then I became interested in taking the text that I was finding that corresponded with a body, and especially something that's kind of with like hands, or like how we like touch each other or relate to each other, and divorcing that from the situation that was describing and putting it into like the non-space of like a studio environment and breaking it down more.
So the text came first,
Yes.
and then
Yeah,
the images
exactly.
afterward.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it could certainly go in either direction. But it's interesting that the text then led to the decisions that were made within the space of the studio. And something I was did not consider asking you until being in this space, and I was planning on asking Ebenezer, and I'd like to hear your thoughts about this as well when it comes time, or can even be now. Very interested in, for both of you, the way that the body is dissected. You mentioned some of this in your text as well about how, and you just said reduced to body parts. We can be reduced to body parts, and it makes me think about surrealism and how surrealism was like a very testosterone-y movement where, yes, women were absolutely involved, but they were muses and they were always cut off at the neck, or there was a lot of violence that was that women bore in the surrealist world, even as they were moving ahead with their own careers. I think about somebody like Lee Miller. Can you talk about that a little bit further, about that dissection, if you will, of the body and the removal? Like oftentimes our faces tend to personalize us, right? These are wonderfully impersonal. They speak of maybe feminine behavior or female behavior, but it's very two-dimensional, and that feels incredibly intentional.
Yeah, I shot a lot of these pictures. They're like wide and open-ended and cropped in afterwards because I was interested in like removing any sense of like personhood or like subjectivity for anyone in particular, and thinking of these more as cultural codes that can be applied more widely.
And it's very interesting that you talk about the fact that a lot of this text comes from etiquette, sources like etiquette books and ideas about etiquette. And there's a visual language to your photographs that I think replicates that and bolsters that idea. Were you encountering images were they drawings, were they photographs in these sources about etiquette? Was there anything that was a different type of language, like a nonverbal or written?
There was some written first-hand accounts, like describing the situation and asking for advice for how to respond to it. There were some like drawn illustrations, but no photographs ever. I did not encounter that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure they're out there, but I didn't use them. Yeah.
Well, thank you for putting photography into that equation. I think it really adds to the dimension and the questions that arise. Speaking of questions and of the body and laying things bare, Ebenezer, it just so happens that you were the final person to speak to individually, and we get to sit in front of your work.
Yeah.
And I am so interested in that, Troi's work may be, a couple of long plane rides away, but there is something very personal about that work. Maybe it's not so much about Troi, but about the individuals who are in that space. They are within a very personal space, a personal world, a personal moment. And we turn to your work, and this is about as personal as it gets, right? This is, and thank you, that takes a lot of vulnerability. And I appreciate that, and I think many people appreciate your willingness to be vulnerable in that way. And so many people are willing to be vulnerable in the work that they're doing. Photography often brings that up in us. It's one of the reasons why I love the medium so much. But as I was saying with Sam, and you bring this up, that you are dealing with your body in a very specific way, and how you have been told to be, but how you are. And you talk about also like body parts and being reduced to parts, and we don't see the whole. And so you do some of that work in the photographs as well, but you expand our comfortable understanding, if you will, our historicized, our put upon us understanding of who we are, who you are, what we should be, who we want to be. That's not a question. I recognize that is not a question. I was talking through it as I look. I guess, are there things that you would like to say? These photographs say so much, and together they say even more. And there's so many moments of like, oh my God, I get it. Like, oh my God, yes, thank you. And I'm not verbalizing well. Would you like to verbalize?
Sure, I'll do my best.
I have failed. I have failed too long.
It's something that I'm realizing of making this work is that a lot of it has to do with time. Like there's time between when I take the photo, when I print it, when I do things on top of it, and I'm realizing more and more this whole other layer of time that exists of I'm used to them. I've learned to love them, all of these images, and then it creates a whole other understanding of them. Seeing them up on a wall in front of you all and having other people experience them gives me the gift of a whole other perspective. People, I think, taking that risk and being courageous to look at it themselves and ask questions of themselves, and the various multitude of reactions that can come from that. So that's one thing to say about it, to the non-question. But the other thing I wanted to say, which isn't so much about the body parts and dissecting body parts, which if I don't get to it, remind me, because I might forget and go on a tangent, but about their performance, or of gender as a performance that we have out in the world, or we learn how to perform in that way, or we naturally perform in that way. I remember, it made me think of something. I think it was in middle school, one of my friends saying, look at your nails. And I looked at my nails. And then they were like, okay, look underneath your shoe, like you have something in your shoe. And so I looked at my shoe. And that was how I did it too. And then they were like, oh my God, you totally failed the test. You totally did it in the boy way. Oh my God, you're so not a girl, you're a boy. And I was like, sorry, I'm just gonna curse over. I was like, fuck! And it's a funny ism, but I just remember so many moments of like that, of feeling like I was hard to do and be the thing that people told me I was. And then thinking, I was like, great, I am nailing this femininity thing. And then shit like that would happen. And it was just so many levels of like terror, honestly. I'm like, oh crap. It really felt like a feeling of, they're gonna find out. I'm gonna be found out, and that was that like terror. And then there was also a thing of like, I'm getting it wrong. And then this other subtle level that I don't think I ever really got to until way later was an extreme amount of anger, which I think a lot of people, no matter how they identify gender-wise, could probably relate to, which is, damn it, so can somebody just give me the freaking rule book? A little bit of, if I'm getting it wrong, can we just be clear? And then that is the frustration of, it's just, there is none. It makes no damn sense at all. And so that was what this was a lot about, was really unraveling and picking apart all of those different layers of what parts are me and what parts are put on me and what parts do I feel like I need to reject now that I'm claiming a part of myself. Am I still relying on that same motive thing? So like, okay, now what are the new rules that I need to abide by? And letting those go and kind of more and more finding just myself in the process.
I'm very interested as well, depending on the selection that is here, but then also on your website, I found multiple references either to particular religions, say like a halo or aspect like that. I was raised Catholic, so that's where my mind goes. And then I also see in certain images references to art history, painting, saints, things like this, women in particular, of course, and the fecundity of women. And would you like to talk about some of that symbolism of it? Because you turn a lot of that on its head in ways that are sophisticated.
Yeah, absolutely. I wasn't raised Catholic. My dad was raised Catholic, so whenever I went to stay with my grandma, I got to go to the mystery of Catholic Church, which was really fun. Getting to just go every once in a while. And then from art history, I thought, I don't know, looking back on it now, I really loved the pictures of certain saints or anything. You know, not without the arrows, the 1,000 arrows. Maybe not that so much. But with the halo, it's that thing of, it looks really cool. And it's like a lovely extra layer of jewelry. It's like this bit of adornment that they get. Really, they can help compositionally a lot. But the thing that I also loved about them is because for that, it was, this is divine. This is spirit in that person. This person in their humanness is sacred. So to put that on top of me and my body, and I'm pretty sure all of them up here, they're done after I've printed them off. So that's what I meant when I was saying there's that space of time. I print them, and sometimes I sit with them for a long time. Because I would love to say I'm like a fully arrived, love myself and all my parts human being, but like I have my days and that's not true. So there was a fair amount of just shame or disgust. Even though it was a part of myself, I really loved seeing at the same time. It was a complex visual. So it became this thing of like, and I bless you. Of like blessing myself, blessing this identity, and even going a step farther and saying, this expression is sacred in my ancestry of lineage, which is Western European. I don't have many sources of like queer, gender diverse gods or goddesses to look to, right? but I can say, or a lot of any of that showing that in history, but I can say, this is sacred. This expression of me is sacred. And then also with the fecundity and the femaleness and all of that. That was me trying to still find, because I'm on, yes, the goddess, wonderful, great, the living earth is alive. And can that still express itself through me, even though I feel this way in my body? Does it have to be the most vivacious, pictures that come into my mind of Venus and Willendorf, of being the embodiment of the divine goddess? How does that still exist into me, and claiming that as well, instead of feeling like I have to, that is now the big thing I have to shut down and hide. Is that translating?
It does.
Okay, great.
Last question. You wanted me to remind you about body?
Oh, yeah.
Last question before we start opening it up and figuring out the future.
Great. So it was a purposeful, you asked the great question of why did I select this body of work, because there's more to this series. But I specifically selected this group because I wanted some that had my face, to bring that humanness, to remind that I am a person, that I am human, that this is one facet of my identity. But I feel like when talking about gender variance, gender non-binary, transgender, a lot of it gets reduced to anatomy, right? Which feels really, really dehumanizing. So this was that way of kind of turning it on its head, I guess. And my nice way of oh, fine. We want to talk about the body, do we? And we just put it in 2 minutes. Well, I'll give it to you. There you go. And so it felt, it helped me kind of claim the power in doing that by being fine, well, I'll show you that body. Here it is. Boom. Yeah. Yeah.
So I'll do a quick time check. It looks like it's about 5 minutes to 4 o'clock. Nobody gave me how long, so we can just keep going. Thank you all so much for being so open about the work that you're doing. It takes courage to apply. Troi was mentioning how you apply for things. So thank you all for applying, and we're so glad that you were chosen. And thank you for being willing to show your work and talk about it to maybe 100 some odd folks in a room. What I would like to do, as I mentioned, is maybe open this up a little bit more. I do not need to be holding this microphone. There are plenty more people who can speak here. But then I wrote my next note here. It says, blue sky ahead, what now? With 3 question marks. And that's almost about it, really. And I think about this all the time. I live, breathe, eat photography. This is my life. This is a life for many of you in this room. And if it's not maybe directly your life, it's a part of your life in some way. So Blue Sky has done so much for this community right here in Portland, in the Northwest, in the country, in many aspects of the world as well. There are only so many places where folks can show photographs. Whether it's this particular physical space, the idea of Blue Sky, what needs to continue past 45 years, and then what needs to be added on to that as the world constantly changes and as photography constantly changes. What do we want to see happen here? Maybe that's the way we can look at this and think about it. What do we want to see here? What do we want to do here? I think we can also open it up for if any folks have questions for our panelists as well. If there was something you wanted to know about that we didn't get to, this would be a good time to ask you. But I would love it if we could take a few minutes and think about what next? What do we want to see?
So I brought my daughter, who's 16 months old. She'd say hi, but not this old.
Could everybody hear the question? Okay, good. Sometimes when nobody answers right away, it's an extra good question.
I think I heard the question. It was a little bit at the end, but you're asking about your daughter and what you want us to kind of,
Well, so like,
how she would see the world and what we want.
well, so a lot of you guys interpreted other artists who aren't here to have a dialogue with you about what they were thinking, and so you had to make assumptions about them. And so I'm wondering what assumptions, or how would you want your work to be evaluated in the future? We were talking about blue sky in the future, so I was thinking, if the planet still exists, how would you want to be interpreted when it's completely taken out of place and time, right? They won't have the context of 2019 to have. Yeah.
I'll be honest with you, I never think that thought ever. I don't think that thought, it just doesn't come into my mind. But I think the difficulty today is producing anything that even keeps anyone's attention for more than it's insane, and I don't know what's going to happen by the time she comes up, because it seems to only be increasing the amount of attention deficit, especially in younger people, the lack of focus and stuff. So to some degree with the images that I produce, I do want to produce images that I feel are strong, that are kind of like that, I forget that album or whatever, but you have something with louder than bombs, because you're dealing with that. It's just explosions going off for your attention every single instant around you. I don't know how you do it. So one of the things with a place like this that I hope continues is that especially for younger people, a brief instant they can come in here and have a degree of silence and a degree of focus, so they can look at an image, just an image, and not be able to flip by it, but just focus on that one moment for that moment. So it's extremely important that places like this exist, maybe more so than ever, because what's going on with our brains, this technology is just, nobody's even paying, no one knows what's going on. We're just going right with it, So I don't know if that answers, but some ideas.
Well, I think if the image is strong and the story is strong, it's going to be timeless. Hopefully, no matter what. I mean, I spend a lot of time in the evenings looking at other artists and painters and photographers and everything, and maybe 80% of those are past artists, and those images still speak to me and other people. So hopefully, I think that's kind of the goal as an artist, to be timeless and carry your message to other generations. So if the work's good, which that's always a hope, that will continue on, hopefully,
I would be really stoked if your child was looking at my work whenever they were older. That sounds cool. And I would say, if I could have any hope to how she would engage with this series, I think it would be awesome if there was lots of other various artists creating stuff that she could look to. But more importantly, my hope would be that whatever they saw in the work, or whatever art photography they were looking at, they could have that patience to look at it and pay attention and be able to track a little bit their reaction to whatever photography they were seeing, and then asking themselves why. That, I think, is a big thing of a doorway of, at least for me, and I've kind of had to work against that, is wanting to get the right art answer. Being like, I get it. I'm acing the art things. And the work that I'm really drawn to creating, but also the art that I'm drawn to, is having it unfold and having that world unfold for me, but also I get to know myself a little bit better through their work. And it might not be the same of what they were trying to say, but I got
pressure as a young artist to have something to, not just to say, but also like a call to action. And that was really heavy. And as I've gotten a little bit older, I've really felt like I bought a house and I live in the suburbs, and I feel like, oh, now I can just live my life as an artist, making a document of what it is to be a white woman in America. And it feels like such a relief, just like, oh, if my work is looked at in the future, it's like, oh, here's one specimen of what it was like to be a human. Like, that's an honor, right?
I'm kind of going to echo the last two people, but I think one of the things I liked about looking at work from the past, and even stuff that's present, because I love doing art walks, is just the inspiration you might pull from something and how you choose to interpret it. Like, one of the things I like to hear and why I like to keep stuff open for my work is someone seeing it and giving me their own interpretation or sometimes title of a piece I did, because then you're like, oh, that was an interesting take. I kind of like that. And so that's what I always found with artwork that I liked. Like, even if I didn't agree with it, like what I could see that I was like, oh, I love this. I'm going to borrow that for me to express myself. And so I would hope they would get that from my work, from everyone's work here. Like, how can they look at things differently?
I don't have anything radically different to say. But yeah, I think when I look at art, it's different from how I used to look at art, but I try to not have a knee-jerk reaction of like, yes, I like this, or no, I don't like this. I think it's much more valuable for me and probably respectful to the artist to bring into the context of that they're making their work in. So I would, if someone's looking at my work in 5 years, 10 years, like I hope they would be like, oh, okay, Sam was this person living in Oregon in 2019, finished this program like at school, like, studied with these people. Like, that's interesting to me to look back at artists. So I guess that's kind of an art historian's job, but I also think it makes a richer experience for looking at art in general.
When I'm one of this guy founders, so we were part of the jury along with Bob and Craig and Terry. When we were looking at the work, I talked specifically about Troy's work, and the camera by itself is this very objective eye, and it's sort of cold morning light, you know, and that I felt like one of the things that was so great about Troy's work is that, like, he completely brings you into the magic of the situation, which the camera is very resistant to doing that. It doesn't want to do that. It wants to be like a forensic tool, you know? And I think that's true with all of the work. I mean, that was sort of, your work was sort of the point of entry for me in that idea, and then I looked around the rest of the work, and I think Sam's work is kind of the opposite, where it puts you into this place, and then you go, well, I want to be in this place. But I think all of it sort of transcends this sort of objectivity. It brings you to a really subjective view of things that's empowered by being able to look at 10 images. I think also look at one image and you can't really tell a story in one image necessarily the way you can in 10. That's part of it. I also want to say that it was supposed to only be 5 people. It was really hard cutting it down to 6. We just couldn't cut anybody out. That's how it works. Great work.
As a follow-up to that, also being a co-juror, what is really remarkable to me is the diversity of the work in terms of, and it was based on, it was chosen because of the strength of each individual artist. And I was amazed at how diverse the work was, how diverse the makers of the work was, and without any, which did not really enter into the thought process. It was just about, well, does the work talk to you? Is it strong? Is it saying something that is a message that, you know, that actually is translated through the work itself? So it was really, really interesting to see that. Now, okay, as a founder, as an older artist, you know, we as founders looked at this work and we decided, well, who was going to be showing here? a question to the younger participants is like, okay, so hopefully most of you saw the work that we had on the walls, right? What kind of reaction was it? Did it seem like it was like old and past? Was it interesting work to you? As being a young practitioner, was there a big gap in terms of what people were perceiving, what our generation is doing versus what we see on the walls now?
I thought the show was just so exciting. It made me feel like, oh, I'm in the right place. Like in Portland, as a part of the Blue Sky community, it really made me feel like this is work that's still really exciting and new. And even looking at the work in the show that was older, thinking like, man, those are really good. Like it's not like they, didn't know what they were doing at the beginning and got better. It's like this is solid work. And it's really exciting to be a part of a community that's like only getting better.
Any other answers for Robert? Sarah, correct.
Well, this is not as kind of maybe an interesting of a question, but it's just sort of a practical one. What do you all feel the role of the print is now?
Role of the print, as opposed to
print on the
pixels.
wall versus electronic form.
From my experience, I feel like the print, and especially what Chris was just saying, of seeing multiple, being able to get the story of the multiple works in the visual language that occurs, I really feel like it is an opening that is a doorway to some world. I think there is still a lot of value in a print, in all art. I think it is, you can get access to a lot of amazing, stunning, beautiful art and artists all across the world through visual media, and that's excellent, and I love it. And it's also not the same of being able to be in front of that work in person and the magic that exudes out of it. Yeah, you're not gonna get it. Thank you. Yeah, but I do really feel like all of that effort and energy and everything put in by an artist, it creates a doorway for things to go through.
I think it finalizes everything. I mean, to me, there's nothing like a print, and I still work in the darkroom, and I love silver gelatin, and I think, for me, taking the photograph is the first half. The print is the second half. There's the content and the process, and I love my darkroom, but I always printed small up until this show, and after this, I'm like, I'm never going back. These photos are amazing, just the detail and everything. Small has its place too, but I don't know, I've never seen my work that large before, and it was an eye-opener.
So I'm a digital photographer. I'm just gonna make that clear. Some of my work does involve post-production. So it's a complicated feeling for me because I know the work I did when I was solely in film and the work I was able to do once I was able to do digital are definitely two different impacts on how, what became what I do today. And so digital does have a huge part of what I do, as well as even getting into it. I found a community that was digital, so it was actually seeing them digital, not just print, because a lot of times when I would go to galleries, most of what I was seeing was not me or not my community, because either it was only documentary or it was never shown in that style. So you found it through digital, either because the artist was very far away or because the artist just didn't have the means to print or access a darkroom or any of that. And I supported my darkroom community. I was a part of that as long as I could, but film changed so much that it became a commodity that was not accessible to everybody. And so I do think that print is wonderful, and actually seeing a print, even seeing kids at a gallery and getting to see something printed has such an impact. So it's really important and is a lasting element. But I think digital also opened options for people who might not ever get to do the stuff they've done with photography, which has blown my mind, because I've seen some people who are 16-year-old kid, never got to take a drawing class because they stopped doing those. And like the work they've made has really opened a door for them. And then they decided to discover like film and print and cinema. And that's like had such an impact. So I feel like the two can work together really, really well. And I think one leads to the other because it's something finite about seeing something in a book or seeing something on a wall. But I think it's also good to remember that like the digital can open it for so many people.
Yeah, I was going to say, the final print for me, I wouldn't do photography if I couldn't make the print at the end. I don't have an interest in photography except for the relationships it's created, but beyond that, I want to be able to create an image that has some kind of, you hope you can create some kind of sort of living resonance in the image. I don't know if you can, but that would be one of my goals that I hope I can come close to, is some sort of essence that still has a resonance that can go back and it's in a tangible print. It's not something that will flicker in the screen or whatever. It's an actual tangible print. So for me, without that, trying to get to that, it's also something you can really live with. Tack it up on a wall or something like that. Look at it over months and months, and if it still has something, then maybe you can start. Maybe it has something. Just keep working on it. So for me, the print is really everything. I wouldn't do photography without it.
Yeah, I'll step back and say the print is what sent me over the edge in photography recently when I started kind of creating again. I was shooting digital, which I never had a digital camera before, and the pictures were good. I mean, to me they felt like snapshots, and I felt something was missing. And that's why I went back to film, because that's kind of where I learned, and I kind of rediscovered that soul of the image again. And I literally built my darkroom, like 2x4s and roofing and everything. And I got in there and I felt like I found the soul to the image again. And then I was able to blend that in with my digital. And I think without that, I don't know, without that silver gelatin or that film-based photography, I don't know where I would be,
I have more of a statement versus a question, but I'm somebody who married into the artist world. And never had it part of my childhood. My family was never interested in this. And what you guys have created here, including my husband's work and for the years we've been together, create a story and you really take it back to for somebody to stop and really study the image and find the story that's in it. You may see something different than somebody else, but the stories behind what you guys put into it is incredible. And it's same for any of the shows you guys have put on here. For somebody who's never had that background and to be able to actually stop and look at it, and now passing on to our daughter of being able to actually take a second and enjoy it and really find something with it that resonates within you. So I appreciate the fact you guys did this and that you allowed them to. It's incredible.
I was going to say that might be a great time to, we got to cut it off. I'm getting the cutoff symbol. And I noticed that there are a couple people who have additional questions, but perhaps feel free to ask folks those questions afterwards. Thank you all so much to the panelists for being here.